Okay, so welcome everyone to this tech talk, which is a Mint file exchange, a technical overview, which is hosted by Alok Singh. Before I get started, I'm just going to go through some housekeeping rules. So, as mentioned, this is being recorded. So, any questions you have, please, we'll give you some opportunity at the end to ask these questions. I'm going to ask a couple of questions myself, and also. We're just going to go through the class guidelines and antitrust guidelines. I'm going to just introduce Alok now. So Alok started his career as a software developer and worked with an L3 system provider for 4 years. He's been with Tracelink for over 7 years and worked on customer implementation of serialization, US, EU, Russia, Indian compliances. And his skill sets include cloud networking, multi-enterprise, enterprise applications, and digital supply chain expertise. And in this tech talk, he's going to give an overview, a technical overview of the Mint file exchange, walking through the transaction process flow. And now on to our antitrust guidelines and class guidelines. As always, our courses are public, so we just ask you not to engage in any discussions about pricing, deal making, selling, promoting, or any other activities which could be seen as anti-competitive. And for our class guidelines, again, our courses are public, so we do have a limited time frame. So we just ask you to refrain from initiating any discussions about company-specific examples. Having said that, if you do have any questions, about what Alok is delivering the tech talk about, please ask at the end. And if you do have more use case questions, then we can take those offline. So thank you, Alok. I'm going to hand over to Alok now, who's going to go through this overview with you.
And thank you, Laura. Thank you for introducing me. Hello, guys. My name is Alok, and I am going to talk about our new product today, which is Mint. So some of you might have heard about Mint, some of you might have not. So before going into details of what Mint is and what it does, I will also sort of try to cover up some of the basics of a new Opus platform, right? So I'll talk about some of the terminologies that we are using in Opus platform. What are the apps, what are the solution, and then get into the details of Mint, and then probably show you a couple of use cases how the transaction process flow works with Mint. So that's going to be our agenda. Now, if at any point of time you have any questions, feel free to ask. And if you want to put your questions in the chat, that is also welcome. Okay. So basics. Now, about the basics. So most of you guys are aware of our track and trace platform, track and trace services platform, where you have that legacy applications which we use, master data application, SNX, SNM, SOM. Now, with this new Opus platform that we are coming up, there are some new terminologies that will come up. More or less, these are the same things that we already have on our TTS platform, but there is a distinction that we need to draw here. So the first term we will keep on hearing about is the network. Right now, what is a network? Now, you guys are already aware that TraceLink is a network-based platform where you have your partners and customers on the TraceLink network. So those customers are on the TraceLink network. You can find your customers or partners on the TraceLink network, and you can connect with them. So on Opus World, the network concept remains more or less the same. So network is a space for collaboration within your company and your specific partner. So let's say if you have a partner, if you have a network for the human health distribution, right? Human health medicine distribution. Now you have specific CMOs, 3PLs, downstream distributors. So all of those collection of those forms, what is called as a network. Now, along with network, there is a concept of solution and application. So going back to the track and trace services world, what you see on your user interface, it is tightly coupled with the application that provides backend logic. But on the Opus side, the solution is something that you see on the screen. When you log into the system, you are interacting with the solution. When you navigate into your TraceLink platform, you are interacting with a solution. So solution is the user interface that you see and you do your job on. Now, there is a concept of application. Now, application is not something that a users would typically see. Applications will provide the backend logic and the APIs. Now, through the solution, through the user interface, you can interact with the application. So, for example, in user interface, you see a couple of fields, you provide some values. Let's say those values are item code and PO number, right? So you provide these values in the user interface, and then you click on get lot status. And then that triggers a message to the application. So in this case, SOM application, serialized operations manager, and serialized application manager, operations manager gets all the information related to that item code and lot number, and the solution displays the result, right? So you can see within this lot how many each is, how many cases, how many pallets are available, are they aggregated or not, and different levels of it. So typically, on the Opus word, solution and application, they provide this sort of isolation where the user interface that you see is independent of the application backend logic. Now, the customers on Opus can license both the solution or application, right? So when you get an application, you get a corresponding solution as well. So for example, if you get Bahrain compliance application, you also get a solution for Bahrain compliance, wherein you can log into your screen and you can interact with Bahrain compliance solution. So I'll go ahead. If there are any questions, please feel free to stop me. Now, the types of applications that we have on Opus. So there are different types of applications that we have on Opus. These are comprising multi-enterprise application, enterprise application, user application, and system application. Now, again, drawing the analogy back to our TTS world, there are certain applications. So if we think about serialized operations manager application, a customer will have their own serialized operations manager application where they can log in, they can check the status of a serial number, they can do aggregation updates there. You could do all the activities, you could send inbound, you could receive inbound shipments, you can send outbound shipment to your partner. Now, those partners have to be linked so that you can share these data with those partners. Now, these applications which allow you to connect with your partner within the networking space are example of multi-enterprise application. Now, SOM allows you to create a network where in one network there is one partner that is connected with your company, right? On Opus World, what the extension of this concept is, you would create a network for a multi-enterprise application, and there might be more than one partner connected on the same network, right? So you can start exchanging the data, the business transaction data with multiple partners on the same network. You don't have to create a separate networks for each of those partners. Enterprise applications are the applications which are licensed for your own company. So think of it as master data exchange applications. So your partners cannot see your master data exchange applications because these are licensed specifically for your company. So you can log into your instance, you can see your master data, company, partner, and product master data, but no other partner on the network, even if they are TraceLink customer or not, they cannot see your enterprise application data, your master data, right? Because master data is licensed per company. The user application are the application which a company does not specifically need to license. These are the application that provide underlying functionality. Um, for example, to use global UI elements or certain other functionalities, as soon as your company licenses one of the multi-enterprise application or enterprise application from TraceLink, user applications are already available to them. Now, system application, they are not specific to multi-enterprise, enterprise, or user applications. System applications are there to provide a connection between all these applications that you see and that you interact with, right? So a example of a system application can be there might be a sort of application which is running in the backend that provides a functionality of creating a network based on the multi-enterprise application, or how do you save or store your data using an enterprise application, for example, master data exchange application. So these are sort of different types of application that are available on Opus. Mint specifically is example of a multi-enterprise application. We will see that using Mint, we would create a network. On that network, there would be an owner who would be owner of this application called Mint, and there would be partners who would be connected to owners Mint, right? And then there is, of course, going to be element of master data, which would be specific to your company. So that would be an example of enterprise application as well. Any questions so far?
Could you give examples of the user apps and system apps different than, say, master data,
Yeah.
which is
So
an enterprise apps?
yeah, so master data is an enterprise app. We'll talk about user application and system application in upcoming slides. So there is a system application that we will see in upcoming slides that is called B2B transaction processor. Now, what this application does is, if you think of it in terms of TTS world, so when a B2B connection is created, when SFTP or AS2 connection is created to receive data from your L3 system, your line level system to TraceLink, right? So there is an application running in the backend for that, for achieving that, for getting these files from the line systems and forwarding this file to your intended application, for example, serial number exchange or serialized operations manager. Now that application is example of a system application that is running behind it. Now, as a user, we do not need to know about system application. I mean, concept wise, yes, but system applications provide this functionality that they allow the TraceLink system to get the files from outside and then send it to the intended application to consume it. Right. So similarly, we'll see in the subsequent slides, we have a system application called B2B transaction processor. Now, the user application is also very similar to that, but the user application would be extended to, for example, your user management screen. Right now, your user management or administration functionalities that you see on the TTS platform, right? That is not part of the serial number exchange, serialized operations manager, or serial number exchange. Those are depending on their usage. Those are either enterprise or multi-enterprise application. We'll get into details of that. But you could interact with user application. You could interact with your administrative functionalities, right? When you get licensed to TraceLink, you get licensed to the administrative functionalities as well. So think of that company administration options, all the options where you create link, where you configure your services, where you add users. Those are all example of user application.
Thank you.
Okay. So now the solution. Now, so the concept of solution is relatively different than what we are used to seeing on the TTS side, because TTS side, the things are very tightly coupled. So you have solution and application coupled, but on the Opus side, what happens is the user interface is entirely decoupled with the backend application, right? It would be useful going ahead when we do another tech talks and we talk about how now utilizing the TraceLink's Opus solution designer capabilities, users can design their own user interface. You will have a flexibility to design your own user interface. You can put your own fields, you can remove certain fields which you don't want on the user interface, and you can add additional fields or logics, right? So that is possible with the concept of solution, because as an end user, we interact with the solution, right? Now, when we say that, there are two types of personas that interact with the user interface. So there is administrator and then there are users, right? Now, users don't need to worry about which type of solution they are working on, because all they see when they log into the system, they see a user interface, they have a certain task or probably SOPs they need to follow. They need to interact with the solution, user interface, and they'll come out. Now, administrators would need to know what types of solution we are dealing with, because those type of solutions can be applied to their network. And we'll get into details of that as well. So I just don't want to get into those details as of now. First, discuss the solution. Now, base solution is something which is released by TraceLink developers. So when we release a solution on Opus, right? So the release notes carry information about um, app and solution, right? So the application is always released by TraceLink dev team, and then there is a corresponding solution that is provided by TraceLink dev team, so that we as a users can start interacting with the system. We can log into the user interface, we can see the user interface, and we can start interacting to the application. We can send data or we can receive data on the user interface. So these solutions which are provided by TraceLink, which are by default tied to an application, are called base solution, right? So when a company becomes a TraceLink customer, you get an application and you also get a default user interface to use with it. Now, so before we get into alternate solution, we'll talk about custom solution. Now, custom solutions are the solutions which then a company can customize or change based on their intended functionalities, how they want to use the solution into their system. So with TTS, you used to get a fixed user interface, but on Opus side, the base solution that you get, which has underlying base functionalities, you could also choose to add certain fields, remove fields, add certain rules to it, maybe validations if you want, depending on your company's need. You'll be able to do all of that. So in order to achieve the customization, what we do is we take the base solution and we make changes to that base solution, and we make our own custom solution, right? So we can define more granularity in terms of roles, how the default roles behave, and if you want to add additional roles, if we want to, let's say, change the label of the field, right? So I call it lot number, but now my company wants to call it batch number. So we have this ability to be able to change the labels as well. So those will be custom solutions that would be based on the base solution, but I can now modify my base solution to my needs, and that would be the user interface that my users will see when they log in. So this can be done by a company administrator by themselves when they have access to the solution designer. That is another enterprise application available for a company. And finally, we have concept of alternate solutions. Alternate solutions might be created by the app developer or a third party, so a service provider third party. Those alternate solutions would also be available on what is called as a marketplace. So think of it as a marketplace which we get on Android or iOS. So there are alternate solution available there, which you can go see uh, their look and feel. You can see if they meet your functionalities. Those solutions are already available there. So only thing that it needed to be done is we can just download those alternate solution on our own company and start using those alternate solution rather than creating a custom solution for our custom needs. So if you want to make a custom solution, we are not we want more functionalities than those are provided in the base solution. We should first go and look for if there are any alternate solutions available, which will provide an alternate user interface. So I hope I was able to clarify the solution, and this is all part of the user interface. So by the way, if you log into Opus today, what you see on the user interface are all these solutions. And if we have not customized it yet, what you see today on Opus are all base solutions. Okay, so now getting specifically to this application called Mint. Right. So before I start talking about Mint, there are some basic terminologies that we should be aware of. So because these will come in the subsequent slides. So there is a terminology called B2B TP, which stands for B2B transaction processor, which is a system application. So users won't see this application. You will not see this application anywhere on the system. These applications would be licensed for all the TraceLink customer by default, so that we'll see in the subsequent slides that how they help us to interact from one application to another application. Then there is this application called CTCM, which stands for Customer Transform Catalog Manager. Again, that's an enterprise application for transform management. Transform is very similar to what we call maps in TTS world. So you know there is a data format that comes into the TraceLink system, and there are map layer available, which converts this data format into what is called as a canonical format, which then TraceLink consumes, right? So the advantage of using a transform or a map, even on TTS side, is that TraceLink is agnostic of the format of any system that we are connecting with. So today we have, for example, L3 system. Let's say we have L3 system A. They use their own format to connect with TraceLink. They send data in their own format. And tomorrow we might want to extend, or we might have some other side where we might have a different line system, B, for example, and they use different format than line system A. So as far as TraceLink is concerned, we just create a new map, again, which is called transforms. We create a new transform so that we can then consume the data in a different format, and then TraceLink can, that transform can convert it to canonical, which is understood by TraceLink. So Customer Transform Catalog Manager is an enterprise application. So that would be available for every customer. Now, this would be useful when we have we'll have different formats of data that are coming in or going out, and we can create customer specific maps and install into their custom Transform Catalog Manager application. Mint, specifically what we were talking about, stands for Multi-Enterprise Information Network Tower, and Mint is a solution, whereas the application that runs behind Mint is called MPC, Multi-Enterprise Process Connect. So solution and application, as we discussed, this will be a combination. So solution is the user interface that we see, that is Multi-Enterprise Information Network Tower. Multi-Enterprise Process Connect is the application that runs behind it. And then there is another concept of this application called XTT, which stands for Extensible TraceLink Transfer, which is again an enterprise application. Now, we will talk about this application in the subsequent slide, but essentially this application acts as a gateway for Opus. So what we do in the XTT application is we have this ability to create the B2B connection uh, in this application itself. So customers can create their own SFTP or AS2 connections, which you can then use with your external system to connect with TraceLink. Using those connections, the files can be sent or transactions can be sent inbound or can be received outbound from TraceLink. So again, every customer would be licensed to extensible TraceLink transfer application, using which they'll be able to send file into Opus or receive files from Opus. So having said that, we'll get into details of these applications. But one by one, let's talk about Mint first. Now, MPC or Mint, MPC is again application and Mint is the corresponding solution, the user interface. MPC is a multi-enterprise application. So in a multi-enterprise application, an owner of the multi-enterprise application, so owner of MPC, can create what is called as a network and add multiple partners to their network. And then those partners can start exchanging data with owner, right? Now, the networks can be created based on the type of partners you have or types of business you have. For example, there might be a network created for all of my external manufacturers or all of my CMOs that I exchange data with. There might be a network created if a company is dealing into human health and animal health products, right? So I might create, because there will be a different suppliers for my human health network, and there might be different types of suppliers, different companies for my animal health network. So I can group these partners into one network and I can start exchanging data with them. Now, MPC being a multi-enterprise applications provide us capability to create these networks to group partners. And then it will enable us to exchange business data like purchase orders, invoices, ASNs, and so on. Okay. Um, so as I talked about, we could create one single network where we could group in all the partners that my company deals with, or we could, depending on the use cases, we could create multiple networks and group my partners accordingly in each of those networks. So one network can have multiple partners, or we can create multiple networks and have group of certain partners there. Now, Mint is the solution that will provide user interface. Now, also the way the system would behave is if we want to group the partners into form of a network, every network can have different user interface assigned to it. So for example, if I'm doing business with my external manufacturers, there are certain fields that I want to see on the user interface when I talk to my CMOs, right? And then if I am dealing with animal health network, there are certain types of field or user interface field that I want to see there. Now, since these are two different networks, I can have two different user interfaces that can be uh, tailored using the solution designer capability. Mint will also provide an info exchange like view, so where you could see all the transactions coming in and out of your system. So XTT is an enterprise application we talked about already, where customers could create their own B2B connection. You could just log into XTT. When you log into the system, you have access to this XTT application. You can click on add. You can add your own SFTP connection. You can create your own SFTP connection, and then you could share the username and password with any external system, so that using those credentials, external systems would be able to connect to TraceLink and they would be able to exchange the data. And B2B B2B transaction processor, that is a system application that will do this sort of intelligence, that if system receives an inbound file, from external system, to which network I should route the file, what sort of transforms are installed, so which format needs to be converted in which format, and then the data needs to be passed on to Mint. So these are the applications that would be part of it. And now we'll see how end-to-end process works using these applications. But as of now, let me take a pause and see if you guys have any questions.
So I'm going to just ask on that note as well, in terms of the files. So if a customer wants to send different files to their partner, how do we go about that?
Yeah, so different files, I would assume these are for, we're talking about different types of transactions, right? Now, the transaction format, the transaction format for different transactions could be entirely different. So for example, if you see on the slide here, we have three transactions that are listed here. So purchase order, invoice, and ASN. Now these three transactions might have a different format altogether. So one of the purchase order transaction might be in, for example, CSV file format. The invoice can be, for example, in IDOC file format, or ASN can be, for example, in X12 or EDIFACT format. Now, leveraging this transform capability, so for each transaction, there will be a dedicated transform, which is like a dedicated map on the TTS side. So if we send in a transaction of purchase order, it goes through a transform that is created to convert that purchase order CSV into canonical, which then TraceLink would consume. Similarly, for invoice, there would be a separate transform that will take in the invoice data in any format and then convert it to the canonical format, which TraceLink will understand. So there will be multiple transactions, but all the transactions will have their own dedicated transforms or maps associated, which will convert this data format into the TraceLink format and then can be utilized by the system. Okay, so let me go ahead and talk about some of the transaction process flows. Now, this process flow at a very high level, what this explains is what happens when a transaction is initiated by an external system. Yes, Matt, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, the question is, if you're set up and you're exchanging information with your partners currently using the classic interface option, to switch over to use Opus, then everything will need to be reconfigured. Is that true?
Oh, okay. So it would not. So what we are doing, and that's a good question. So what we are doing today is it depends on application to application. So when you now on the TTS side, we are using serialized operations manager. That is what I would assume to connect with our partners, right? So when we migrate the serialized operations manager application on Opus, your partner connections are already there. So it does not require a reconfiguration on Opus. Now, if there are new application like Mint, and we are going to create new networks, we are going to add new partners depending on the transaction type that now we want to exchange, which is different than serialization transaction, then we will have to create what is called as a link. So there is no configuration like we used to do in TTS. We used to send service invitations, configuring the services and so on. On the Opus side, what we do is we just create a link. So you find the partners on the network, you click on add, the partners get added to your network, and then you can start exchanging the data. Now, on the Mint, so we are talking about the business transactions. So we are talking about the transactions like purchase order, invoices, ASNs, those sort of transactions. Now, usually those transactions are triggered from some external system like your ERP, right? So imagine a scenario where a purchase order is created into ERP, and that purchase order, when it was created, it was sent to Opus platform. And then on the Opus platform, that purchase order, then it will have a receiver information for which receiver this purchase order was intended to. And then Opus platform, using your Mint application, it sends the purchase order to that partner of yours into their format, right? And that transaction can go to the partner's ERP directly. So it originates from a customer's ERP, goes to Mint, gets converted into the your originators or owner's ERP format, into Tracelink format, and then gets converted into the partner format and gets delivered to their own ERP. Now, how does that process work? So if you look at this diagram, what happens is customers, so buyer own mints. Now buyer needs to issue a PO to their supplier or seller. Now, in that case, what buyer does is buyer user logs into their ERP, they create a purchase order. When they create a purchase order and click on send, the ERP sends this purchase order information to Tracelink via a B2B gateway, which is the XTT application, Extensible Tracelink Transfer application, where we have created the SFTP or AS2 connections. Right, so the file, the transaction, it can be in any format. It will be received by Opus from the XTT app. And then once the XTT application receives this file, it will send that to a B2B transaction processor application, which is a system application. So now what B2B transaction processor does is it takes the incoming file, looks up the format, and then it has the transforms available for that transaction type. So we are talking about PO. There will be a transform available for purchase order transaction, and that will convert the outside file format into canonical, which is the format understood by Tracelink system or Tracelink application, and that canonical would be sent to the buyer's MPC application. The buyer's MPC application receives the canonical. You can log into the user interface. You can check the purchase order details, or depending on the receiver information, it will then be directed to, again, a system application. Now, from the incoming file, system knows who is the receiver for which this PO purchase order was created. So it will be sent again to a B2B transaction processor application, which will have now outbound transform uh, available, which will convert this format into the format that seller expects, right? So the buyer ERP can be in format A, the seller ERP can be in format B. So we need to have a transform available on inbound side, which can convert format A into canonical, and then we'll have a transform available on the outbound side, which can convert the format into the seller's ERP format. And then those files would be placed into seller's XTT. So imagine they are using SFTP. It will be placed to their SFTP folder. From their SFTP folder, their ERP can pick these transactions up. And that's how the seller's ERP will also be updated, right? So in this case, the partner who is seller does not need to own Mint to get the transaction from the owner, because owner will create what is called as a network. They will have the partners available on the network, and as soon as owner creates a transaction and send it to Opus, uh, Opus will be able to find out the receiver, convert it into their format, and then deliver those files into partner's ERP. Any questions on this flow? Okay, so I'll move on to the next flow, where this now seller owns the MPC application, right? So what you would see here is, irrespective of your partner is in the supply chain, you're acting as a buyer or as a supplier, as long as someone owns MPC, we can add partners to the network, right? So it doesn't matter whether our role is a buyer in the supply chain or is of a seller in the supply chain. The data goes into the MPC application via the B2B connection, which we create in XTT, the SFTP or AS2 connection. And since the XTT, as we talked about, it is an enterprise application. So it will be licensed both for the owner as well as partners. So we give partners license to XTT on behalf of owner so that partners can also get the transactions which they're intended to receive from owner from their B2B connection. So there will be two separate B2B connections. Owner will use their own B2B connection in their own XTT because it is an enterprise application available only to the owner. And then on the seller side, they will also have XTT. Now, what MPC does is it takes the data from one system, converts it into a format, and then passes on the data into a different format to the seller's XTT and subsequently to their ERP. Right? So if you look at both of these diagrams, so irrespective of whether seller owns the MPC application or buyer owns the MPC application, the process is more or less going to remain the same. Okay. And then there is this concept where we have buyer and seller both own MPC, right? So it's kind of a use case where as a SOM owner, you have a partner who is connecting. We can receive data from a partner into our SOM, or we can send data to a different partner who is not using TraceLink into their repository. Now, there might be scenarios where both are TraceLink customers, so both own SOM, right? So in that case, also, if you see data comes from the external system into our B2B connection, from our B2B connection, it gets converted into a format which TraceLink understands, which is a canonical format. Now, in this use case, there is an additional layer of B2B TP which decides that whether both the parties that are involved in this transaction, they own Mint or not, they own MPC or not, right? And it just sends file from one MPC to another MPC. And then so that you have what is called as a process network created, data goes into the process network, you can view the data on your Mint, right? And then it gets, so the outbound process remains as it is. So rather than receiving data from owner's Mint, you receive data from your own Mint. So you can then now do the further analysis on that data. You have reports and dashboard capabilities available. You can see what transactions are happening, how many transactions did I receive into my system, right? Whereas the partner view also gives them an ability to see the user interface, but it is with respect to every owner that they connect to. Whereas a Mint owner, you would be able to see all your transactions from all the different partners at one place. But the inbound and outbound format, it remains very similar to how, in case if only owner owns a Mint or only partner owns a Mint. So these three scenarios again are applicable here. In all the scenarios, the data originates from an external source. It is received by TraceLink using this gateway application called XTT, which provides us ability to create a B2B connection, gets converted into a format which is understood by TraceLink. So there is a transform there which converts the data into the format which can be understood by TraceLink. And then on the outbound side, TraceLink converts this data into the format of the receiving system and then places the file on the B2B folder so that the receiving system can get those transactions or files from TraceLink. Any questions on the process flows? Any questions on anything that we discussed so far? I mean, I tried to draw an analogy of what we are doing in TTS world today, but TTS is more specifically towards the serialization transaction. But here we are giving ability to add business transactions on top of the serialization transactions as well. So we could start exchanging business data like purchase orders, ASNs, and so on.
So I'm just going to ask a question, Alok, about the transaction process flows of the different use cases. So you mentioned there is additional layer for when the buyer and seller both own MPC. How much more involved is that? I'm just kind of comparing it to TTS in that respect when it's a service to service connection when you're onboarding a TraceLink customer and linking them to SNX and SOM, for example. Is it, I mean, how you mentioned the additional layers, is it a lot more involved or, yeah?
That's a good point because we understand that on the TTS side, when you configure partners, whether it is service to service or service to non service, there is a lot of work that goes behind it, right? So you need to set up, you need to receive service invitations, you need to set them up. Those IDs should match. If they don't match, you have all those issues and all. Now, the purpose of this B2B transaction processor system application here is the system application, the B2B transaction processor application is smart enough to make those decisions, right? So who is sender, who is receiver, and so on. So what happens is on the Opus side, we don't have a concept of setting up the service links like we do on TTS. So what we do is on the Opus side, we find out a network node. So similar to TTS, when you go to your partner page, you find a partner on the TraceLink network and you say add. Now, when you click on add, there is a link that gets created. And folks who are aware with setting up the product track services. So this is what you do in product track. You go to that module, you select the partner and you click on link. And if that partner is available on the network, those identifier matches, they just link, right? Now, on the Opus side, we don't need to do any of the configuration because the B2B transaction processor is smart enough based on this linking that this is the owner of the transaction and this is the receiver of the transaction, right? So it can make its own decision how to route the messages. Now, in case of service to service also, the B2B transaction processor is there just to decide whether I just have one MPC. So data is going out from one MPC directly to the receiver, or then again I'm receiving data from outside source. So inbound and outbound scenarios, right? So if you have one MPC, that decision is very easy to take. If you have two MPCs, right, both are mint owner, then data should flow from both the MPCs so that both have record of this transaction onto their network, right? So that is why this B2B transaction processor is there to take that decision as well. Okay, I received an outbound file, but now I'm not going to deliver it directly to the customers or partners B2B connection. What I'm going to do is I'm going to route it to the another owner of MPC, and from there I will route it to their outbound connection. So that is why this B2B transaction processor system application is there. But this goes back to our initial discussion or where we started the call. There is a concept of system application. Now users don't need to set up those system applications. Those system applications are there to take their own judgment. They will decide on their own how system should behave efficiently. The reason we are discussing it here to give more clarity on how it would work behind the curtain, right? Otherwise, users will not see all this happening in B2B transaction processor and so on. They would only know that we sent a transaction, it went from here to here. Users also do not need to know if a partner owns Mint or not. So like if you go back to TTS world, if let's say I'm a SOM owner and I'm going to send a shipment to my partner who does not have TraceLink. So I send SOM invitation to that partner, but that partner cannot send invitation to me because they are not the TraceLink owner. But in case of TraceLink to TraceLink, we both need to subscribe to each other's SOM service and configure it. Now, those decisions are not up to owners now, right? Those decisions will be taken care by B2B It automatically knows whether the receiving party has MPC or not. If it does not have MPC, how should I behave? Where should I route the file? If they have MPC, then how should I behave? Where I should route the file, right? So technically, it is lot easier than what we do today in TTS. Okay. Any other questions from anyone? Okay. So I'll give it back to Laura. Let me know if you guys have any other questions.
Thank you, Alok. That was really interesting just to, go into a bit more technical detail about file exchanges and how it's working behind the scenes and how those files are converted. So really interesting, and we hope to have more tech talks on Mint over the next coming months as well. And thank you very much for attending today. As Alok said, if you do have any questions, please do feel free to email us at traceLinkUniversity@tracelink.com. And any questions for Alok, I will be sure to pass on to him. But thank you, everyone, and thank you so much, Alok. That was really great. And like I said, this has been recorded and we'll be posting it up on TraceLink University.